In this video, I'd like to take some time to discuss about a few more story game plots that I have not recorded but still played and remember to this day. So firstly, I would like to talk about Daycare 2, which is the second installment of the Daycare series. The plot is as follows. You and a group of baby friends are dropped off into a daycare, where the caretaker, Sarah, welcomes the infants with open arms, letting them in for a while to explore and play around for a while. Eventually, Sarah gets the infants to play some soccer for a while. Now, regardless of the outcome, the infants begin to feel hungry as night approaches. Sarah then prepares a much-needed dinner for the infants. While Sarah's cooking the dinner, the TV in the living room turns on and begins to broadcast the breaking news, where the news anchor stated that an unidentified monster attacks a daycare the last day, with the children being terrorized. Fortunately, they have, however, escaped, with the monster and his minions still lurking around, poignantly. The news anchor then warned everyone to keep everyone safe until the signal was cut off. As the signal cut off, the power in the building was cut off too. With everyone shocked and trying not to make a peep, the monster then enters the home, again terrorizing the children for several minutes, until Sarah finally restored power. With the power back on, the creature then abruptly disappeared for a while, but this was only the beginning for them, as he would only return. The infants start crying and complaining about the creature to Sarah. Sarah at first did not believe in a creature, but instead got everyone else off to bed, as the night continued. While the infants were asleep, the monster meanwhile tampered with the circuit boards. Daytime finally came, as all the infants have woken up for some breakfast. The infants continue to eat and wander around for a while, until the infants then all gather back to the living room and contemplated about the monster for a while. Coincidentally, the monster's minions appeared and terrorized the infants. Sarah overheard the conversation and initially did not believe in the creatures until finally seeing the minions. That was when they all overreacted and tried to escape via the elevator. But since then it was already too late to leave, as the main creature rigged the elevator by discharging it to a very lethal amount. Now with the elevator landing in a dark unknown corridor, Sarah suddenly disappears without a trace, as the infants progress further and further through the red corridor. After some time the floor below them collapses, leading them to another underground corridor. This time in the mines. After finding an escape route, the infants then find an entrance to be boarded up by wood planks. So they then use their wooden swords to break it down and then finally get into a minecart. Finally, in the minecart, the infants were able to reach to the other side of the mine. But this time they had to traverse through an obby, in which they were fortunately able to get through by sheer luck. Finally able to traverse to the obby, they were finally able to leave the cave just in time as it collapsed. Now in the forest where it was now nighttime again, acid rain began to fall from the sky. Initially the infants struggled to find shelter until they find a campsite. The infants remained at the campsite until it stopped raining. With it being cold outside, the infants find an axe to cut down some trees for logs. Those logs were then brought to the campfire to help start the fire. With the campfire now running, the infants were able to heal themselves from their earlier injuries until suddenly lightning strikes on top of it. Now damaging the infants once again, acid rain and thunder began to fall from the sky a second time. But with nothing else to do, the infants decided to remain in the camp. However, as it stopped raining, a wolf appeared and terrorized the infants, in which they were fortunately able to kill. Daytime finally rose as the infants were finally able to leave the forest without interruption. The infants do not cross the bridge up ahead and instead go through another cave, where they would instead have to face off the creature for the last time. The creature revealed his plan to corrupt society, turning a utopian world into a dystopian world ruled by his minions. The infants demanded to return everything back to normality. For that reason, they were left with no other choice but to defeat in, yes, of course, a boss fight, along with his minions. After finally being defeated, his chains broke and was finally dropped into the lava, where he got rid of his minions and instead returned everything back to normality, restoring peace once again. Now back at the daycare, Sarah welcomed back the remaining infants with open arms. Major cliffhanger here was that she may have been the monster herself. End of story. Now for Camping 2. In Camping 2, you again go on a camping trip, this time in Terra Park, where Park Ranger Daniel now makes a more frequent appearance in the story game. Daniel at first welcomes the tourists with a tour of the campsite that included a bathroom and a small cabin. Once entering the bathroom, the lights malfunction with it briefly showing dead people. Regardless, after Daniel then gets everyone to split up for the night to get some rest. The tourists that remained in the main campsite were able to rest for a while, until Zach Nolan appeared from nowhere and began chasing after the group trying to stab them. Those tourists were able to get back into the cabin just in time, as the doors closed on Zach Nolan by luck. But the group now together, Daniel reunited with them. The group tried to explain to Daniel that Zach Nolan tried to murder them. However, he initially did not believe it and did not take it too seriously at the time. So he anyways got the group to go hiking the next day. Night was now approaching as the group finished hiking. Getting back into the main campsite, acid rain began to fall from the sky again as everyone sheltered and attempted to rest for the rest of the evening. Eventually stopped raining as Daniel was surprised the rain stopped the fire. The rest of the group then made the risky move to find pieces of wood, avoiding traps placed under trees that shot arrows at them. After the fire was restored, Daniel left to go retrieve something he forgot at cabin. While gone, Zach Nolan then added C4 explosives, briefly terrorizing the group. As Daniel returned, he found the group shocked over them nearly dying. Eventually, one of the group find a rifle in the blue tent. Fearing that Daniel would betray them, they initially thought of killing him. With all the supposed evidence prior, the armed person decides to reconsider his choice and decides to let Daniel live. Daniel was finally relieved to still be alive. He then informed the group that a large storm system would approach the position, so they made the decision to get some shelter, now this time in the hole. Forgetting the rope to get back up, they then find another way to get out via a small corridor, which first led to a maze. Upon leaving the maze, they traverse to the other side of another room filled with poisonous snakes. The group then stumbles upon a room where fog begins to increase rapidly. Once they all make it to the top, reuniting with Daniel once again, Zach Nolan then tries to kill the group after finally being confronted, but was confronted by the insane spirit that instead murdered Zach Nolan, and then disappeared shortly thereafter. End of story. Now for Mansion, the first game to chronologically occur in the camping series, before the events of Hotel. One day, you and a group of strangers hear a doorbell, and upon opening the envelope mail, you receive an invitation for dinner due to undisclosed events. During the evening, you and the rest of the group proceed to enter the mansion by 8 p.m. In the mansion, you meet Zach Nolan in the dining room. Immediately disappointed that a family of 5 did not appear for dinner, he excused himself to quote-unquote inspect the dinner. Everyone else tries to reassure him, but to no avail, as he now begins to terrorize the guests, running up to a closet on the second floor of the mansion until Zach Nolan breaks in with an axe and yells, "Here's Zachy!" You then run and end up in a construction area. After a while, you then find Emma Logan's spirit, who rip the floor open and fall through an obby. After clearing the obby, you climb up a ladder to an empty room. You finally realize that several spiders were now coming through a hole on the left wall. Once finally making through the spider-infested room, everyone now finds out that Zach Nolan blocked the front door shut. Desperate for another way out, you then open the door to a library. After finally being able to escape through the library, you finally get back to your home. Zach Nolan then menacingly glares at you, ready to attack again. End of story. Now for Camping 3, the most recent game in the Camping series, and also probably the last one ever. The plot is as follows. You arrive at a cold snowy area called Wika Peak, greeted by Daniel and Steve, park rangers. The park rangers then toured the campsite, which included a cabin, a frozen lake, the forest, as well as abandoned mines, and that's pretty much it. Finishing the touring, the park rangers then let everyone else to explore for a bit more until sundown. Once night approaches, everyone was now back in the lodge. Hearing crying nearby, the crowd then finds Steve alone, crying on the floor in agony. From nowhere, a humanoid mouse figure kills and eats Steve. After discovering the situation, everyone now had to flee the mouse and run back to the cabin, while also avoiding lightning strikes summoned by it. The mouse would then glare at the crowd for a second until it decides to leave for a while. The next morning, the group contemplates briefly on their next move, as the mouse now knows where they are planning to stay. Eventually, one of the people gets sick and begins to sneeze. Trying to avoid the sick people, the rest of the group then plans to acquire 7 pieces of wood to restart the fireplace, as well as heal the people affected by the cold. Night approaches again, with the crowd now wanting to stay in the mine away from the mouse. Now all realize they have nothing to eat, since they have not eaten in a very long time presumably. Everyone is now hungry and decides to sacrifice one of the people in the group for their own hunger. Afterwards, the mine starts to fill with snow, and the crowd goes to Obby's, where they meet Daniel on the other side. Finally out of the mine, Daniel then leads the group to where Steve died. After a while, the mouse starts chasing as Daniel hides. He then finds that one person has gone missing, but nobody wanted to tell why. Because of practicing cannibalism that they didn't want to tell. Regardless, Daniel now tells the group that they would have to get back to the lodge, since the mine was not safe anymore. At nightfall, the humanoid mouse appears again and scares the players. The mouse now reveals that Limbo is the daughter of the mouse, leading them outside into a dual boss fight. Once the two were exhausted from all the fighting, the mouse zaps Daniel and the rest of the players. Then Daniel and the group were getting pushed into the edge of the cliff by the Limbo and mouse. At the very last second, the family from earlier, now in their ghost form, appear and push the cart back. All at first try to fight until the sun appears and breaks up the fighting with a flash. Emma and Zach Nolan appear and were the monsters the whole time. The son finally gets the people to end their differences as the father apologizes for hating Zach's daughter. Zach forgives him at last. However, the cart starts to move again. Zach then runs to the front of the car and sacrifices his own life to stop it from falling. He himself fell and died at the very end. End of story. Now for Airplane 3. The plot is as follows. Everyone is called for a conference where the general welcomes them, introducing himself as General Poncho. Poncho then enforces his orders to always be followed, or otherwise be punished. Poncho then orders the people to sit down, as he then explains their mission by stopping a plane hijacker that resembles Trump, who was holding people including the captains hostage. The hijacker would then try to crash the plane while in autopilot mode. Coming to a lift, they then reach the docking station, where Poncho orders everyone to take a military outfit. After the group is suited, Poncho ensures the plane is ready, but to his dismay, he realizes the plane is almost empty, so he then orders everyone to fill it back up. Afterwards, everyone was now able to take off. In flight, Poncho states that the plane is following up towards the hijacked one. With people hungry, Poncho then lets the people eat the bananas. Poncho then makes a crude joke saying that they were poisoned when this was not the case. In the night, lightning strikes the boarding plane, with one of the engines shutting down. Poncho is then pushed out of the plane to fix the motors. Once fixed, a humanoid skeleton appears and taunts the players, forcing them inside the plane again. Once safe again, Poncho asks the pilot about the skeleton, but the latter replied that he saw nothing related to a skeleton. After some time, the plane has finally landed on the hijacked plane. Poncho then leads the group into the hijacked plane. With little time, Poncho has the group search the open storage behind them to release the boards. They were fortunately able to find a hammer in there. Poncho then quickly knocks off the boards and opens the door to the cabin, and they finally see the hijacker approaching the cockpit. Meanwhile, the passengers were crying. All of them were eventually untied by the group. After a while, the plane starts to finally fail, with the cockpit now engulfed in fire. Poncho then gives the group parachutes to get them to escape the plane. If the group befriends the hijacker, that will be the good ending, as he'll accept the offer, but then soon after will suffer a heart attack. After some time, the plane finally crashes, but the captain and the remaining group survived, but Poncho died. The skeleton revives the hijacker but transforms him into a black creature as a punishment for failure. End of story. Now for Airplane 4. The plot is as follows. Everyone is first woken up by a father. He reminds the group of the flight they were going to take today. While he was cooking burgers, everyone else got to pack their bags. Afterwards, the father finishes cooking the burgers and then invites the players outside to eat them. While doing so, the father listens to the radio, making a brief podcast about the previous events of Airplane 3. The father finally forgets that they are late for the flight, and they will never make it in time by foot, so instead, they all entered via an illegal passageway at the last minute, while 14 small personal planes were used to cross over the tunnel. Once entering the airport, they failed to get past the metal detector, as the father brought weapons, and the security guards detained the rest of the group, including the father. The plane takes off without them, while the skeleton appears and blows up the now taking off plane, and then afterwards terrorize the group briefly until leaving. The security guards, now turned into monsters by the skeleton, then attacked the group for a while until they were later defeated by the attacking group. The father is now infected, as he gets everyone else to leave via the vents and climb up to a conveyor belt for baggage to the roof to escape. Poncho reappears again, revealing he faked his death. He then leads the group into the street, coming up to the same hijacker from the previous story, who by coincidence was still alive. Poncho refused to help the hijacker, and so he then leads the group into a maze where the minions attack for a while trying to outrun them. At the end of the maze, they find an altar for the skeleton. A trapdoor then opens, leading them to fall to an exceptionally large room. They are now trapped in the cage. Then of course a boss fight appears. After defeating the skeleton, it dies as the hijacker makes a speech congratulating them for their efforts. End of story. Now for Pet Story. Oh wait, the plot line makes no sense for me. So, yeah, I'll skip that one. Instead, here's the classic single-player horror game some of you may remember from other YouTubers such as Flamingo for example. It's called It Lurks. The plot is as follows. One night, you and your brother Grim are trying to sleep. You try to interact with him, but he instead says, "Get out of my room, please." Getting down from the stairs, you find your father downstairs. He then talks to you, saying he will go outside to buy some groceries. He then instructs you to be in bed before 10 p.m. As the clock reaches 10 p.m., the clocks play the Westminster chimes. You say to yourself, "I should go to bed," and then you eventually fall asleep back in bed. After an unspecified amount of time later, you wake up again with something coming from the basement. You then ask yourself, "What's that noise?" and investigate. Grim has since then disappeared from his bedroom. You then walk downstairs to your parents' bedroom. Finding a key on the floor, you then unlock the basement. Further investigating, you then find a machine and a mannequin and a secret switch you interact with in the basement. After some time, the switch opens, revealing a long corridor with a door at the other end. Nearing the other side, the door slams shut directly in front of you. Coming from behind, a black monster named Gregory then touches you as the screen goes black. Seconds later, you wake up back in your bedroom, realizing it was all just a nightmare. It is already midnight and you finally realize that you are now home alone. Your father nor Grim has ever returned from the outside. You then go back to bed. Still around midnight, you wake up again. You now find footprints seen landing from the main entrance of the home to the basement. Eventually, an emergency alert system broadcast begins to play on TV. You are then told the following. Secure all entrances. Do not interact with anyone outside. If a humanoid figure appears, a noise can hear or some objects begin to move on their own. Do not investigate. Turn off all lights, cover windows, and stay silent at all times. The TV screen then cuts to black. Shattering glass could be briefly heard. The voice of your father will then be heard, pleading you to open the door because he lost his keys while running from something chasing him. You then will have to ignore him to not be jump scared and die. The smiling man can then be seen moving. You then turn off all the lights and cover all windows with cardboard, and then go back to bed. You then wake up in a long hallway with two corners. Two doors can be seen before the end of the corridor. One of them is locked and the other one leads to a high ground with a glass screen that isolates the higher ground from a lower one. Flicking the light switch, a monster is then revealed. Going back out the hallway, you find two more doors, where you then enter the right one, as the left door is blocked. You then escape a small maze behind it, leading it to a large hallway. A creature called the Stranger breaks a wall behind your back and starts to chase you. Fortunately, outrunning the monster, you then find another maze, where you now find a button. Pressing the button, you activate an alarm, which triggers the monster coming to your location. You then scream to yourself, "I need to hide," as you then hide inside the locker. Power goes out for a while until powered back on as a new door opens. Back in the house, you find that the footprints and the window covers are now gone. You then reassure yourself, saying, "I guess it was all a bad dream," and then you get back to bed. Now in the watchtower, you find a monitor with three cameras, a light that shows the watchtower's location, and a microphone. Interacting with the microphone, the monster asks you, "Want to play a game?" The monster then asks for your whereabouts and if you are alone. You finally wake up from your dream, as the monster begins to knock on the door. You must hide in your closet, as the monster breaks presumably a light bulb or glass, smashing it, and then closes the door. You then get out of your room back downstairs. There is now a disc in which you insert into a DVD player. In the recording, Grim explores several empty rooms and corridors, until finally finding his father. The father asks Grim to find a control room and let him out, but the deco monster begins to knock on the door, as the father tells Grim, "Tell your mother and player name that I love them, and I love you as well." Grim then continues down the hallway when the monster, now disguised as the father, instructs Grim to go left, but instead goes to the right door to avoid getting trapped and jump scared. Now in the elevator leading up to the cabin, Grim then finds a note saying, "I am still alive," in bad handwriting. The Smiler then breaks into the cabin and jump scares Grim. The recording finally ends, and now you have a while to contemplate until a loud noise of glass breaking is heard. You are now in the electric room. You then pick up a flashlight, which then leads to an open door. You at first find a large room with a hallway leading into a dark maze. In the middle of the maze, you speak to yourself, "I have to hide in 2 minutes." After turning on at least one generator, you then try to activate the next few generators while hiding from a monster named Terrence. Once the timer runs out, it will say die. If hidden in the locker for a while, the timer resets. Once you finally get all the generators on, you then end up in the elevator lift. You then press the button which activates the elevator lift, and then the time changes to no. The elevator then reaches the top. You then exit the building through a canyon. Walking for a while in the canyon, the screen goes black again. Now waking up back in the house, the phone rings. You get downstairs to answer the phone, and the father tells you that you have to leave the house immediately, since it was no longer safe in there. He also revealed that for years he kept a secret. His secret was a teleporter. Getting down from the basement, you end up in the teleporter room. Pressing the button the first time, a light comes on after a few minutes. Starting the second phase, Capone appears, as you had to first hide in the locker until phase 2 is complete. After that, you press the button a third time. Now having to outrun Capone until you hear a beep. After the beep, you press the button one more time. You then now have to run to the teleporter where the lid closes on Capone. Capone will try to attack you, but you teleport before he would even jump scare you. It is now finally morning and you are now at the beach. You then fall unconscious for a while. Waking back up, you are now in Richard's cabin, where he is seen making breakfast. Richard told you that the father as well as Grin we're making some things. End the story.
Now for the final mentioned and still remembered game, A Night at a Hotel. This game was a classic to some few people. Made by Unilac, this was a game that planned to have 3 chapters, with the 3rd chapter being left unfinished, and the game's abandoned as Unilac quit Roblox. But anyways, I only remember the 1st chapter because I of course only played the 1st chapter. The background is as follows. Room 45, home to an unknown, malevolent, paranormal entity. People who have stayed in this room have been heard to have repetitive seizures, night terrors, and disturbing vision. Exactly last year, Clarissa, your former wife of 9 years, has finally settled the divorce in court after being caught cheating. You still care for her, you still want to be with her, you even cannot stop thinking about her. You think of her every day and fall into a downward spiral. Your friends then pressure you to get some drinks and forget about it. One night you find a hotel in your town. Now the plot is as follows. After arriving in the hotel, you check your phone, a room. Apparently safe. You then talk to the receptionist requesting the room. The receptionist said that they were all booked out. However, you argue with him saying you saw a room online 5 minutes ago in the car. You explain to him it was room 45. The receptionist, initially hesitant about the decision, initially denied. But since the room was cursed, he warned him that 22 people died in that very room. You initially deny it and take it as a joke and still insist on booking the room on room 45. Initially thinking you would be unharmed, the receptionist finally gives you the key. You then start to feel dizzy after binge drinking. A ghost briefly appears while you come back down to the reception. You then collapse and then pass out, asking for help. You then wake up back in your room. A snake stuck on the wall is then seen. You are then jump scared by another ghost as you collapse down the stairs again. You then begin hallucinating your wife as you make it down to the reception. Walking past the reception, you see the hallucination of Clarissa again, not acting eviler than before. You then walk to the maintenance room, where a worker says, "Why are you down here? Guests are not allowed here." You are jump scared again, as the employee from earlier is now stabbed and hanged on the door frame in a split second. Entering an empty shaft, you are then thrown back up into a dark room filled with ghosts. Those ghosts now begin to taunt you as you eventually escape it through a frame. Now back in your room, the phone rings. The receptionist saying, "Hello, please go to the front desk. I need to speak to you." Walking back into the reception, suspense plays for a while as he then began to talk to the receptionist. He was worried over your safety. He explained your actions while you were being drunk and hallucinating. Learning about what you have done, you remain silent for a while. The receptionist reveals to carry you back to safety. Getting back into the room, still hallucinating a little bit, you then find Clarissa in bed, contemplating about you cheating on her. After finding her dark thoughts in her head on your bed, the room begins to deteriorate. The phone rings again, this time an unidentified person mocking you saying, "If you wish to relive the experience, press 1. If you wish to leave this room, die." The rest of the hotel then follows suit and deteriorates a bit more. You then yell to the receptionist, telling him you had enough and now you want to leave the hotel. You complain about the nightmares in your head as you make the decision to finally leave the hotel. Getting back to your home, driving back home, it was 3 a.m. from that point on, and you were about to fall asleep until you suddenly hear a doorbell ring. Getting back to the door, you find out that your home has been magically moved back into room 45. You are then pushed back into the main room. Getting into the bathroom, you still hallucinate over Clarissa, who is crying in the bathroom. She then taunts you. Still in disbelief, you get back to the bedroom. The phone rings again and taunts you once more, telling you that you cannot check out unless you die. The phone hangs up on you. Leaving the room again, you find images of past victims who died in room 45, which the description and dates. You then walk back to the reception. Now, with the receptionist dead and hanged into the wall, you then discover a gallery room in which you then find more images of dead people. Now you walk up into an image containing your future self, where you are extremely hungover. You walk into the image and find the police ready to confront him. Your future self contemplating on his ex-wife for a while. You then try to get back to sleep, but the house instead begins to catch on fire as it deteriorates further and further. With your future self now dead, you walk into a TV where you are teleported to a news station, which was recording the incident where the future self was now found dead, years after cheating, possibly even decades. Walking down the stairs, you are then transported to a bathroom. This time with the door removed, getting into the mirror, you find ghosts into the room, taunting you once more, along with Clarissa's hanging corpse. You then fall back into a room. The ghosts then reveal your past mistakes. As a ghost confronts you and taunts you once more, you try to fight the ghost by throwing wine glasses after going through an existential crisis. You then pull out a match, finally burning the room. The ghosts, along with you and your soul, you finally die. In the beach now, presumably heaven, you find Clarissa, now as a ghost. You then apologize to her posthumously as she forgave you over fighting your inner demons, burning the room down along with you. Clarissa the ghost was finally pleased to see you in the afterlife, in peace once again. They finally began to feel true love to one another once again. A quote I learned in this game was, "Remember to never take love for granted times with loved ones." In conclusion, the story games released in late 2020 and beyond are the ones with much worse quality and storylines due to techniques used by developers to make money and always have to involve obbies and unrealistic boss fights. But this game, however, is the best story game I have ever played, now finally understanding where the game is going, and it's just sad to see it abandoned into pieces. To me, the story game is the precursor to camping. The Airplane series is made by Poncho Kings, the Camping series is made by Samson16, the Daycare series is made by Parwa Studio. And now end of story, and now end of the extremely long video explanation. Goodbye for now.